What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Monday, August 5th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. And we're going to walk through DraftKings tournaments today, as we usually have been. Accidentally screwed up my setup, so that threw me off for a second. But as we have been doing on these shows, going to just go through the 50 lineups I'd be playing in large field DraftKings tournaments if the slate had started right now. Obviously, not all the lineups are in. This stuff will change some between now and lock. But talking through what I like about what I'm getting to, what I don't like, potential strategies, all that stuff, answering questions in chat. So if you have those, throw those in there. General housekeeping thing. Going to be getting ready and going on vacation with my family for the rest of the week. So I'm going to try and fit in shows when I can, but the schedule will be kind of sporadic. I'll tweet out each morning what I am going to do, and I'll obviously post on YouTube as well. So keep an eye out for that, but it's not going to be as consistent as usual. I'll be back next week. Everything will be back to normal, but going to get in whatever shows I can this week. I just don't know a set schedule yet. So I will update everyone on that. But for today, we have an 8-game MLB slate. So pretty nice slate size. I think they are fun because negative correlation and, negatively correlating with the field plays a little bit bigger role on a slate of this size, but it isn't everything. Like when you're talking about a 3 or a 4 gamer, you obviously don't have as many teams to choose from, so ownership matters a little bit more as well. Jake DeWitt said over under on strip clubs I visit while on family vacation. Just going to Southern Maryland down on the water. I don't know that they even have them down there. If they do, I don't really know that I would want to see the people inside them. So I'm going to go with 0 on that one. So yeah, nice sized slate, 8 games. No real weather concerns. It doesn't look like. A couple of games that maybe have a little bit of rain in the area, but nothing too crazy. Wind blowing out in Washington. It is hot in this area as well. So good hitting conditions in that game, but no real weather concerns as far as rain goes. So that should make this slate relatively straightforward as well. So going to go position by position as usual. Look at stacks, look at positions. And then if you have questions about teams I'm not getting to, players I'm not getting to, I'll be happy to give my thoughts on them. Obviously, I didn't do the slate overview show this morning either. So this will be my first time talking about the slate and maybe noticing things that I hadn't noticed yet. So feel free to throw questions in chat as we go through. I'll start with the pitching here. Also, one other thing, having issues with the SaberSim layout. It doesn't matter for this show, but if you're just looking at the screen, the pool column is the percentage of the 50 lineups that I have that player in. The exposure column is only looking at 20, so you can ignore that. They're going to obviously be pretty close generally, but the pool column is the one that would be my actual exposures if the slate started right now. And we can see getting to a ton of Tyler Glass now. Nothing very surprising there at all. It is a difficult matchup with the Phillies. That goes without saying. A very dangerous Philadelphia lineup. It is a good park for hitting as well in Los Angeles. The Phillies active roster ranks 18th in strikeout percentage. They have a 103 WRC plus. So certainly not a safe matchup here, but pitching on this slate isn't that great. And Tyler Glasnow far and away has the highest strikeout percentage, 32.8% for Glasnow so far this season, 2.67 xFIP, also the best on the slate. I do think you could make the case that in that $5, 40 whatever thousand entry tournament on DraftKings, maybe you go a different direction. Maybe you negatively correlate against Glasnow. I think that case could certainly be made, but that isn't the route that it appears I would be going. I'm taking the projected points from Glasnow. He doesn't project remotely close to anybody else, any other pitcher on this slate. So I'm taking those points. I'm trying to find ways to be different elsewhere. Logan Webb showing up a bit over the field for me, as is JP Sears. Not taking a huge stand on either guy. They are both relatively popular. Webb coming in at 19%, Sears coming in at 20%. Obviously a good matchup for Sears going up against the White Sox. He is relatively expensive for his skill set, but again, pitching on this slate, you just have a lot of pitchers that look pretty similar, and then Glasnow running away with it. Good matchup, obviously, for Sears. 18% K percentage, 4.82 xFIP so far this season. He is at home, so that downplays some of the power risks. Also, the fact that the White Sox don't really have anybody that hits for power, or only have a couple guys that hit for power, also downplays the power risk for Sears. The White Sox do only rank 19th in strikeout percentage on their active roster against left-handed pitching since the start of last year. So that's not ideal, but they also have a 91 WRC plus, and yeah, it's obviously a good matchup. Jermaine said this is a prop show. No, it's not. Never has been, never will be. Logan Webb, not the best strikeout matchup against Washington, but he is a pretty good pitcher. It is a park downgrade for him. Like I said, good hitting conditions in Washington, much better place to hit than San Francisco, but kind of just have to take what you're given on this slate. 20% K percentage for Webb, 3.3 xFIP, and just kind of looks like a guy here at 8,400. Reasonable price tag. David Festa, I'm about 2x the field. Going up against the Cubs, only 6,100, so that looks pretty good. Limited time in the majors so far. He has struck out 21% of hitters. He has also allowed 3 home runs per 9 innings. Obviously, that home run per 9 inning number is going to come down. No matter how bad he ends up being, that number has to come down. 4.01 xFIP looks good, though. He just looks like a solid enough pitcher in a relatively dangerous matchup against the Cubs. 103 WRC plus, 22.5% K percentage on their active roster. But again, it's just the salary here that is making Festa look pretty good and why I'm getting right around 2x the field. Projected ownership on Glasnow for Steve is about 52% at the moment. Einsteinium said the lineup the Dodgers have been rolling out. Would you say that Nola has an easier matchup? I assume than Glasnow. Possibly. I don't actually have the numbers in front of me to break it down by individual players. Obviously, like Shohei Ohtani skews it so much because his numbers are so good, it pulls up everything else. But I think the Phillies lineup is probably deeper. I don't know that I would say it's an easier matchup. I do think it's probably a better strikeout matchup. Dodgers ranked 6th in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching this year. They have a 101 WRC plus, which is comparable to where the Phillies are at. So I think it's pretty comparable. You obviously aren't going to feel safe with either guy, but they are obviously both good as well. Aaron Nola, I am only getting to around half the field right now. If you wanted to play more Nola, play less Glasnow, I think that's perfectly reasonable. Like I said, it is a better strikeout matchup for Nola, and he is still a pretty good pitcher. 23.7% K percentage this year is basically tied for third on the slate with Sean Manaea. 3.49 xFIP, that is good as well. Obviously, dangerous hitters in that Dodgers lineup, but some weaker bats as well because of the injuries that they're dealing with. We do not have that lineup yet, but there's really nothing they can do other than the top of the lineup's going to be good. Ohtani, Smith, Freeman, Hernandez, and then the rest of it's not going to be very good. Gavin Lux, Hayward, maybe Nick Ahmed's in there. There's just a lot of ways they can go. Kevin Biggio, I assume we're just getting nothing but home runs from the bottom of the Dodgers lineup at this point. But it is, a very, very dangerous top of the order for Nola, and then he should be able to handle the bottom of the order. So, if you wanted to just take a bigger stand on Nola, he is getting half the ownership of Glasnow. I do think that's a reasonable approach. I do think that would be like what I probably did if I wasn't playing a lot of Glasnow. If that ownership was scaring me off, Nola would obviously be a guy that I'm looking to get more of. But because I'm prioritizing Glasnow, it is costing me some Nola. He is projected to be a little bit more popular than Logan Webb at a similar price point. He does give you better strikeout stuff, but I'm just getting to Webb a little bit more. Kai Busch at 4K flat. I'm right around the field there. Projected for 11% ownership. He is showing up about 12% of the time for me. It's purely a price play. The matchup, as far as strikeouts go, is good for him as well. The park is good. 4 games at AAA this year, 2 starts, 14 total starts, 80 and 2/3 innings pitched at AA. At AA, where most of his time was, struck out 24.5% of hitters. He projects for like a 16 to 18% strikeout percentage going forward in the major leagues. Obviously doesn't have much experience at advanced levels. He probably isn't going to be very good right out of the gate, but he is only 4K. Pitching on the slate isn't great, so there's not a lot of opportunity cost. And he is stretched out 5 and 2/3 on July 30th, 5 innings pitched on July 23rd. So workload concerns aren't an issue as far as he physically can give you innings. It's an issue as far as he's relatively likely to just get hit hard and taken out of the game. But at 4K, he's a starting pitcher. So I don't mind getting to a little bit of him, especially on this particular slate. Kyle Hendricks, I'm right in line with the field at 8%. It's Kyle Hendricks. There's not a ton to say there. You can see getting to a little bit of Heaney, a little bit of Corbin and Singer. I think the only other interesting pitcher out of this group down here at the bottom is that, just like Nola, I'm not really getting to Zach Gallen at 8,600. It is a very tough strikeout matchup for him against the Guardians. They rank second to last in K percentage against right-handed pitching this year. They have a 101 WRC plus. The game is in Cleveland, which we know has been very good for home runs this year. So that's a downgrade for Gallen as well. But a lot of this really just all comes back to Tyler Glasnow. And I've made this point a lot on this show. Whenever you're watching somebody or listening to somebody talk about their player exposures, or you're going back and looking at what somebody did on a previous slate, it's always important to keep in mind that they're not necessarily taking like player specific stands on every single player. It's very likely, I don't have any issue with Aaron Nola. I don't have any issue with Zach Gallen. It is simply that Tyler Glasnow is coming out as such a priority for me that it is costing me a good amount of Nola and Gallen. So it's not a negative take on Zach Gallen or on Aaron Nola. It's just a very positive take on Tyler Glasnow and the gap between his talent level and every other pitcher on the slate. So just keep that in mind. It's not, I think Zach Gallen sucks or he's going to get hit hard or anything like that. It is a tough strikeout matchup. And again, I'm just prioritizing Glasnow right now. If this number were to start coming down, the first two that I would expect to go up are Nola and Gallen. As far as other pitchers that I'm not really getting to, Heaney, really tough matchup against Houston. Does give you some strikeout upside, but it's a very difficult team to strike out. They have good power bats as well. Corbin, decent matchup against the Giants, but like I said, good hitting weather and overall not a good pitcher at all. 16.8% K percentage, 4.27 xFIP is like a full run and a half better than his ERA this year. His FIP is also like a run and a half better than his ERA. So I've said this before. I think that Corbin is one of the worst starting pitchers in baseball. I think he's probably also not as bad as you think he is. As a lot of people think he is, but he's still pretty bad and not somebody that I really want to be getting to. There is negative correlation. I assume the Giants are going to be pretty popular with that run total. So there is that argument. But it's Patrick Corbin. Brady Singer, I'm not getting much. Neither is the field. He's another pitcher in this mid 8K price range, but he does have a tough matchup against Boston. It is in Kauffman Stadium, which is not good for strikeouts. It is a park downgrade as far as home runs go for the Red Sox, but it is still a good park for offense. And again, not an easy park to get strikeouts in either. So overall, I think I'm pretty happy with the way my pitching looks. I don't really like most of these guys. I don't feel comfortable with any of them. Like even Glasnow, he's going up against the Phillies. So how comfortable can you really feel? Same for Nola, going up against the Dodgers. But there's just no pitcher on the slate that checks every box today. There's no guy that is 1, a good strikeout pitcher, 2, in a good park, and 3, facing a bad offense. They don't exist. So again, that kind of, I think, is why I'm cycling back to Glasnow too. I've talked about it in the past where, if you kind of think about the way players show up in lineups, where maybe like you're starting with just wanting the highest projected guys, and then you're factoring in ownership. And so if ideally you want somebody that projects well and isn't projected for enough ownership, but if you get a situation where you think that most of the pitchers, the ownership projection is pretty much where it should be, then you kind of just like loop back to the top and go back to just playing the guys that project the best. And in this case, as you can see, I do have Glasnow 6-7 points ahead of any other pitcher. So I'm just taking that and hoping he does what he's projected to do. And then I can find ways to be different with bats. So that's how my pitching looks. Now I'll look at stacks next, because again, generally when we go by position, you're going to just see which stacks I'm getting to anyway. I am getting to San Francisco. I'll be interested to see what those lineups look like. Ideally, I'm finding ways in them to not have like the most popular Giants and Glasnow, but we'll see. Oakland, getting to them. I think that looks perfectly fine going up against the pitcher that has made 4 appearances above AA. The White Sox on the other side, I do think they're interesting. They negatively correlate with Scherer, who's relatively popular. Scherer does give up some power as well. Again, this park isn't great for power, and the White Sox don't have much of it, but righties do have a 224 expected ISO against JP Sears this season. He's not a great strikeout guy. Luis Robert, Andrew Vaughn, Corey Julks, I think all look fine. Miguel Vargas is pretty cheap. Baldwin's still cheap with stolen base upside. So this is a spot with the White Sox where I think if the slate were a little bit bigger, they wouldn't be that interesting because for one, you would have more opportunity cost with your bats. But for 2, JP Sears would be getting less ownership. But because pitching on this slate is pretty weak and the slate isn't that big, JP Sears is going to be pretty popular. And so it does push the White Sox up a bit. He also, despite being left-handed, is not very good at controlling the running game. So that is a bump as well for somebody like Baldwin that we know will steal bases if he gets on. It's a bump for somebody like Luis Robert as well. Stephen Leibowitz said Kauffman could be good for a Duran one-off. Yeah, very good park for Jarren Duran, especially when you consider that he is left-handed too. So like in Fenway Park, it's a good park for offense, but it plays up right-handed home runs more so than left-handed home runs. So you're not even getting that big of like a drop off for home runs for Duran as a lefty. And then you're just getting this park where you have a massive outfield. Batting average on balls in play is going to increase. He can use his speed to extend hits, turn singles into doubles, all of that. So yeah, I do think the park is really nice for Jarren Duran's skill set. Houston against Heaney obviously looks fine. He does give up some power. His overall numbers this year have been getting better. He started out the year really slowly, but still about 1.2 home runs allowed per 9 innings for Andrew Heaney. The Astros are obviously a team that has plenty of power. It is a good home run park in Texas as well. Right-handed hitters against Heaney so far this season, 184 expected ISO, lefties at 144. Their hitters have been pretty inexpensive for a while now as well, so that's nice. Alvarez and Altuve remain priced up, but Diaz likely hitting cleanup at 4,300. Pena's cheap at 4,100. Bregman's only 4,400. And then you get the bottom of the order with guys like Myers and Singleton and Dubon that are like 3,200 or less. So you can use Houston, get a lot of upside, get to a pitcher like Glasnow, still have pretty good one-offs around them. I would expect these Houston stacks to project pretty well. And then you're getting a little bit of just a bunch of other teams. As far as all stack types go, San Francisco, White Sox, Oakland, still all up here at the top, along with Houston. Cincinnati gets a little bit of a bump there. Miami gets a little bit of a bump. So getting to that game in Miami. Then we get to the KC Boston game. So we can see that, pretty much prioritizing San Francisco and then getting pretty spread out with stacks. That is something that, going back to the point I was making a little bit ago as well, how player exposures and everything all work together across your set of lineups. Generally, and not always, but generally, if I'm getting a ton of one pitcher like I am with Tyler Glasnow, the more concentrated I am at pitcher, generally, the more spread out I'm going to be with my stacks and vice versa. And usually, I am going to be more concentrated with pitching than with stacks just because pitching is easier to project and you're just going to be right more often. But not surprising given how much Glasnow I'm getting to that I am pretty spread out as far as what stacks I get to, just because I don't want a ton of teams that are overlapping with each other and, competing with themselves for first place. Cam said, do I have a problem with Arizona, Minnesota 5-3 with Nola and Sears? No, looks fine to me. I'm not really getting to a lot. I'm not. Never mind. Wasn't sorted. I'm not getting to a lot of Arizona or Minnesota really, but I think both look fine. The matchup with Hendricks obviously is perfectly reasonable. I don't have any problem with that. The pitching is fine. Like I said, I don't feel comfortable with Nola or Sears, but I don't feel comfortable with any pitcher on the slate. They're clearly two of the better options today. Kyle Hendricks as a cheapy option away from Festa ownership. Sure. I think that's his role. As I showed, Festa, at least for me right now, isn't projected for that much ownership. Really not that much more than Hendricks. So if that's the case, I am around the field on Hendricks and 2x the field on Festa. There very well could be a situation where Festa's ownership comes up, or maybe he just ends up being more popular than projected. But with the way ownership's projected for me right now, I do prefer Festa, but that's just because he's not getting that much more than Hendricks. If you start to get a bigger gap between him and Hendricks, even though Hendricks sucks and the matchup isn't very good, I do think that he's one of the obvious pivots away from Festa at $200 less. Patrick Corbin is kind of your other option in that price range, and I guess I would prefer Kyle Hendricks. That's a really just gross spot. I do prefer Festa out of the three, though. Now, going position by position, starting with the catchers, very, very spread out here, which isn't surprising given the mix of stacks I was getting and catcher just being a position where you're not going to get that many good hitters. Shea Langeliers is showing up as my highest owned guy. I think that looks good. Actually, that's a good question. I don't know why I don't have him. Any problem with Hunter Brown? No, but I apparently don't have him for some reason. It must just be a price thing. He's getting 14% ownership right now. Glasnow getting 52. Not a good strikeout matchup. The Rangers do rank sixth. They have the sixth lowest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching this year at about 19%. So it's a bad strikeout matchup for Brown. It is a tough park to pitch in. He is a good pitcher, though. He has the second highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 25%, 3.68 xFIP. I think he's just another one that I'm not getting to because of Tyler Glasnow. So, yeah, that's probably what it is just that I'm prioritizing Glasnow for 600 more. Again, I have Glasnow projected like 7 points better than Brown, and it's only $600. So I'm just going to typically get to Glasnow in that spot. If Glasnow's ownership were to come up a little bit or Brown's goes down, maybe I start getting more Brown. But I do think it's reasonable too. Like if you're just taking a different approach than me, Hunter Brown would certainly be another one of these guys that pops up the less Glasnow you're playing. But with me playing a lot of Glasnow, I'm just having trouble getting to Brown. Am I expecting the 4K pitcher to pitch 70 to 75 pitches or less? I mean, I think that's like that's a reasonable expectation, just given that he's never pitched in the majors. Like I said, he did pitch 5 2/3 last time out, 5 the start before that. He made 14 starts at Double-A this year. I don't expect him to be significantly limited or limited at all from like a physical workload standpoint. It's not like he's been working out of the bullpen or isn't stretched out or anything. I think expecting like 75, 80 pitches is reasonable just because there's a good chance that he doesn't pitch that well and gets taken out. But if he is pitching well, no, I don't think he's getting pulled at 70 pitches. Especially for a team like the White Sox. Like, they don't give a shit as far as, winning games. It's not like they're putting this guy out there, and if he gives you 5 shutout innings and he's at 70 pitches, maybe if they were like a contending team, they would be like, okay, cool, we just got this, this rookie just completely exceeded expectations. We got 5 good innings out of him. Now let's get him out of the game and get it over to our bullpen. The White Sox have no incentive. Like, they don't care about winning games. They can't win games. They suck. They don't have a good bullpen anyway. So, like, if he gives you 5 shutout innings and he's at 70 pitches, I would assume he's just going to continue pitching. Whereas if you were on a good team, maybe not. So, median pitch projection, probably like 75, 80. But from if this guy is actually pitching well, is he capped there? I would doubt it, just based on the fact he's been starting all season long. So Shea Langoliers, like I said, obviously looks good. The park isn't ideal, but he does have a lot of power. Not facing a pitcher that is likely to get a lot of strikeouts either. 7% ownership is completely reasonable. Patrick Bailey getting 10% ownership against Corbin. I like getting to him. He is batting 7th, so move down in the lineup a little bit, but still, park upgrade, switch hitter, no pinch hit risk, 3,800. All that looks good. Gabby Moreno, Connor Wong, Yainer Diaz, Salvador Perez, Corey Lee, all these guys just showing up like 10 to 12%. So I am very spread out at catcher. I would assume that for the most part, these guys, whatever catcher I'm playing, is probably a part of either at least a mini stack, if not a full stack, since none of these guys really stand out as like exceptional plays compared to everybody else. If you look over here at the projections, like everybody's projecting for 6 to 8 points. So it just makes sense to correlate your catcher with other parts of your lineup, since it is a relatively weak position, create a situation in those lineups where you have positive correlation. So if we look at the Shea Langoliers lineups, have him paired with Toro here in a 2-man, have him by himself. He does have, standalone power, so that's fine. Have him paired with Seth Brown and JJ Bleday. Here he's by himself. Here he's in a 5-man, another 5-man. So mostly at least in mini stacks. And I think as you get to some other catchers that are, not as good hitters, you probably see that increase. Like Corey Lee, I would hope, is mostly paired with some other White Sox. I don't really want a ton of Corey Lee one-offs if I can help it. So here, he's paired with Vaughn and Robert, 5-man, 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 3-man. So yeah, like all the Corey Lee lineups are stacked. And that makes sense. He's not giving you the same sort of just standalone home run upside that somebody like Langoliers or, Diaz or Salvi Perez gives you. So catcher pretty spread out. Not sure if I have any huge fades or anything. Also keep in mind that Salvador Perez, you can play at first base as well. Yeah, no huge fades, no huge stands on anybody, just kind of very spread out, probably mostly going with whatever team I'm stacking. At first base, getting to a lot of Andrew Vaughn. So he's somebody that I do think is fine on his own because he does have some power. He also, fits in perfectly in White Sox stacks. If you are going to them, certainly you're going to want Andrew Vaughn a pretty high percentage of the time. He's one of the few guys on this team that does actually have power, and he's only 3,100, so that looks good as well. He's not very popular, only getting 7% ownership. I'm getting around 2x the field on Seth Brown. I'm a little under the field on Josh Bell, but he does look like a good value bat. 3,300 batting cleanup. That's just going to, look pretty good going up against Logan Allen. I don't have any issues with that, just not quite where the field is. I'm a little below the field on Ohtani. He's somebody that maybe, so like he positively correlates with Glasnow as far as being on the Dodgers. But I wouldn't be surprised if you just kind of see like the more glass now you play, the harder it is to get to Ohtani and vice versa. I think that would make sense given that he's 6,600 and Ohtani is really expensive. Singleton, I'm a little over the field. Low, I'm a little over the field. So spread out on a lot of first basemen, but taking a stand on Andrew Vaughn and a decent sized stand on Seth Brown as well. Seth Brown, I think is in a perfectly reasonable spot if he is in the lineup. We don't have that lineup yet, I don't think. We didn't when I ran everything. Doesn't look like we have it still. But if he's in there, he's 2,400. He does give you some power upside. Favorite single entry team? I don't really have one. Like I could see it going a few different directions for me. I haven't made my small field stuff yet. Based off this, like I would guess San Francisco probably, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's Oakland. I wouldn't be surprised if it's the White Sox. Wouldn't be surprised if it's Houston. The only reason I say that, I wouldn't be surprised if it's Houston. I think those lineups are going to project well, which, I do care about more so in single entry than large field. But, the White Sox, I wouldn't be surprised because I do tend to negatively correlate pretty heavily in small field stuff usually. So I could see that. San Francisco obviously is just going to project really well. Oakland is going to project well. I would guess it's one of these top 4 teams for me. I don't know which one it'll be. And obviously it could be somebody else. But I do think that the teams that are showing up for me in large field are probably the teams that are most likely that I would get to in single entry also. Second base, Zach Geloff showing up a lot. Field's only getting the 5%, so I like that as a value play at 3,100. Gives you some stolen base upside in addition to a little bit of power. It's not a great second base position. He's very cheap. Brooks Baldwin seems to show up for me every day now. Second base, shortstop eligible, stolen base upside. And like I said, JP Sears not very good at holding runners either, despite being left-handed. So that's good for Baldwin, who is going to look to steal if he gets on base. Jonathan India, Castro, Ketel Marte, Altuve, all showing up around 10%. So again, pretty balanced at second base as I have been in most other positions. And again, there's just not a lot of guys that really stand out here. There's a lot of guys that project pretty similarly. Ketel Marte getting the most ownership by a little bit. I'm slightly below the field, but nothing too crazy there. Perfectly fine matchup against Logan Allen. So far this season, Allen has allowed a 241 expected ISO to right-handed hitters. So that looks good for Ketel Marte. 382 expected WOBA. Obviously sets up nicely for him. Michael Garcia, Casey Schmidt getting some ownership as well. I am half the field on Schmidt, which is interesting to me given that that's only at second base. So let's see what I'm getting at shortstop. I don't have him at shortstop. So I am under the field on Casey Schmidt, which is interesting to me given that I am getting to so much San Francisco. I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that, like I said, I'm playing a lot of Glass now, who's really popular. So if I'm going to go to a team like San Francisco, I do need to find ways to be different within that stack. Casey Schmidt is projected to be popular at 13%, but also there is some pinch hit risk for him as well. He's not always going to be pinch hit for. And if the Giants, just blow up Patrick Corbin, then there's going to be no need. But there is risk for him later in the game, especially if it is relatively competitive. You do have, I'm double checking this, but assuming he didn't get hurt and I missed it the other recently, you do have Wisely off the bench, or you should have Wisely off the bench. Looks like he's still active. So you have a left-handed middle infielder there that can pinch hit for Schmidt. So when you get a popular guy like this that is a platoon guy and does have pinch hit risk, it does, in addition to the other things I was saying, make me happy that I'm not getting as much as the field. Not really getting to Garrett Hampson, not really getting to Candelario. Hampson's another one where, I think anytime somebody like Garrett Hampson is popular, I'm not going to be that upset about not getting to them. He's not really, a home run threat or anything like that. It is also another potential pinch hit spot. James Paxton getting the start for Boston. So you have the lefty starting. You have Hampson in the lineup. Kyle Isbell is starting. Michael Massey is starting. Pasquantino is starting. So those 3 lefties are starting. I'm double checking Kansas City's lineup to see what other lefties they have. But MJ Melendez is going to be on the bench. And so is Adam Frazier. So you do have legitimate pinch hit risk for Hampson later on in the game, especially, assuming that it's somewhat competitive. Once you get a right-handed reliever in there, it's likely that MJ Melendez is going to hit for him. Freddie Fairman has pinch hit risk as well because he is DHing here. So those 2 guys are scary. Renfroe to some extent, but a little bit less, I think, than those other 2. So keep that in mind with a relatively popular Garrett Hampson also. I'm not getting to Candelario at second base. Not sure if I'm getting to him at third. I am, like I said, getting to India. So no huge fades there, but I do think it's interesting to talk about Schmidt and Hampson in particular. The fact that the field is using them for value, but they are pretty likely to be getting hit for later on in the game. Moving over to third base now, getting a ton of Matt Chapman. So here I am eating one of the more popular players on the Giants, but not a whole lot you can do there. There's not pinch hit risk with Chapman. He's one of the best hitters on the team. He's reasonably priced at 4,600. He gets the good matchup with Corbin. All that looks good. And so I'm just getting to Chapman. Alex Bregman, only getting 7% ownership is really interesting to me. Again, it's a pretty solid home run spot for him. You're getting the park upgrade going into Texas. You're getting a pitcher in Heaney who's not terrible, but does and always has given up home runs. 184 expected ISO, like I said, to righties this year. I really like that lack of ownership coming into Alex Bregman. Emmanuel Rivera, I think if he's only going to be 2% owned is an interesting value play just because, we just saw at second base that the field's projected to use guys like Casey Schmidt and like Garrett Hampson. $2,100 Emmanuel Rivera isn't like worse than those guys from a range of outcome standpoint. The matchup isn't great and the park certainly isn't great, but if, those guys are going to be 5 times as popular as Emmanuel Rivera, I'm fine going to Rivera. Same can be said for Abraham Toro. If he's in the lineup, I'm getting around 2x the field there. Pretty much even on Devers against Singer, which looks perfectly fine to me. I'm getting around the field on Lewis, Ramirez, a little bit under on Garcia. Or that's 8% Garcia at third base and 8. So I have 16% Garcia. So I'm a little bit over the field on him against Paxton. I am double checking. I don't remember how Paxton is at holding runners. He is extremely good. So that is a down negative for Michael Garcia, who, a lot of his DFS value does come from stealing bases. James Paxton has been very, very good at preventing stolen bases, but still, a good value leading off at 4,300 against arguably the worst starting pitcher this year in Paxton. Not entirely sure how he actually landed on a contending team. 170 expected ISO to righties this year, so it's not like he gives up a ton of power. He just doesn't get strikeouts. He allows you to put the ball in play. This isn't a park where you really want to allow guys to put the ball in play. So I do think Garcia looks good. I would like him more, though, if Paxton was not great at holding runners. I mentioned Miguel Vargas earlier as another value play. I'm getting to him 6% at third base. He's only projected for 4% ownership. I may have more in the outfield as well. I think he's a pretty good value here because he is kind of by default one of the better right-handed hitters on the White Sox, just because they don't really have that many good hitters. And, Sears is fine, but it's not like he's a great pitcher or anything like that. Vargas was highly regarded in the Dodgers system, never really, panned out so far in the majors, but he does still project to be an above average major league hitter in any publicly available projection system, despite what he's done in basically a little less than like a season's worth of at-bats so far in his career. So I do still like that price tag, especially because he's not getting any ownership. Somebody like Vargas at 2,800 shouldn't be half the ownership of Garrett Hampson. So I do like that I'm getting to him. At the top in ownership, I'm getting to all these guys, pretty much to some extent. Like I said, I have 16% total Garcia. I'm over on Chapman. Devers looks fine. So, TDID Forever said, do you like Philly as a stack from a correlation standpoint? Yes and no. I think that they are perfectly viable because Tyler Glasnow is going to be 50+% owned. And Philadelphia is good. So, like if Philly's offense just does what they're capable of doing, you're in a great spot to take down these top-heavy tournaments. That being said, I can't really say that I love them, given that I'm not getting to them. But again, I have a ton of Glasnow. So if I wasn't just jamming Glasnow, I would probably have a good amount of Philadelphia. I think if the projected ownership on Glasnow were to come up, I probably start playing a little bit more Philadelphia as well. But I think that 50% ownership on Glasnow is just more or less where it should be, given how much better he projects than every pitcher and how high his ceiling is. So I'm still prioritizing Glasnow, as you saw, but yeah, you're never going to be like wrong in large field top heavy tournaments for stacking against some 50+% on pitcher, no matter how good they are. And then with Glasnow too, you do get stolen base upside. So there is the possibility, like it is possible that, even if Glasnow pitches well, maybe the Phillies get some points, just some fantasy points just by, a walk and then some stolen bases. And then you get to the bullpen and add on points. Like there are routes for Philadelphia to get there. But for me, Glasnow, at least right now, is pretty clearly the priority. At shortstop, getting to a ton of Elly De La Cruz, so happy to see that. Projected for 15% ownership. I'm getting 34%. That, goes without saying, looks great. Roddery Munoz is not very good at pitching. The only negative for De La Cruz is that this game is being played in Miami, which is a substantial park downgrade from Cincinnati. But other than that, looks really, really good for him. He will be hitting left-handed against Munoz as well, which is important because that is his better side. So you like to see that. Miami has one left-handed reliever in their bullpen, or sorry, two left-handed relievers in their bullpen, Andrew Nardi and Austin Kitchen, it looks like. They should probably both be available today. Nardi did pitch on Saturday and Friday, but didn't pitch yesterday, so I assume he'll be available. He is typically a back-end guy too, though, so probably doesn't come into play until the later innings. So overall, a very, very good spot for Elly De La Cruz. Tyler Fitzgerald, not surprisingly, I'm getting a lot of him in my stacks. Less pinch hit risk for him just because he's played so well lately. You do have, Wisely, like I said, on the bench, lurking as a potential pinch hitter when right-handed relievers come in, but I think it's more likely that Wisely comes in for Schmidt than for Fitzgerald, just because Fitzgerald's pretty clearly made it, made the point that he should be playing as much as he can for the Giants. So I like getting to him. Not getting to Casey Schmidt at shortstop, like I said, had like 6% at second base. Bobby Witt Jr. goes without saying, looks really good. Similar ownership projection to De La Cruz. I have them projected similarly. A little surprised that I have like this huge gap between De La Cruz and Witt. You could definitely make the argument that they have the same range of outcomes and that, Witt's could even be slightly more favorable. But, very, very similar range of outcomes. If I'm going to play them 50%, play 25% of each, like that's a perfectly reasonable stance. But for whatever reason, I have more De La Cruz, which I am perfectly fine with. And like I said, James Paxton is very, very good at controlling the running game. So not that makes Bobby Witt bad by any stretch. Bobby Witt is better when he's facing a pitcher that doesn't control the running game, but still obviously a very good play, and I'm right around the field there. Not getting to much of any other shortstop in particular. 2x the field on Luciano, which makes sense with my Giant stacks. Not a priority at 2,700. Obviously going to prioritize getting to Fitzgerald from that team, but he's only getting 3% ownership. Showed up 6% for me. Perfectly fine. Nobody else really standing out. The shortstops that are projected for the most ownership, I am getting to, with the exception of Schmidt. So I do agree that De La Cruz, Fitzgerald, and Witt are, for lack of a better phrase, good chalk. As you can see, I'm either with the field or above on them. Not getting to Schmidt as much, though. And then wrapping things up here with the outfield, a lot of Mark Canha, a lot of Luis Robert, a lot of Encarnacion. So these are kind of scary to me. Randy Hendricks said, don't know if you already spoke on this, but is there a lot of pinch hit risk for the Giants? Yes, there is. Pretty much anytime the Giants face a lefty, there is going to be pinch hit risk. Now, one nice thing today for these outfielders is that Michael Conforto is starting and Mike Yastrzemski is starting. So there is less pinch hit risk than usual. Normally you have against lefties at least one of those guys coming off the bench. So I do think there's a little bit less pinch hit risk for like Encarnacion than there otherwise would be. But you do have Mark Canha at first base with Lamont Wade on the bench. So that's not ideal. Also, even though it's not lefty-righty, Heliot Ramos is not starting. So unless he's injured and I missed it, that's somebody where like if you get a situation later in the game, a high leverage situation later in the game, even though it's righty-righty, or yeah, so Ramos is injured, it looks like. He's not on the injured list, but he does have a thumb injury. So I assume the fact that he's not starting today means that he's not going to be available. So there is less pinch hit risk than normal, but there is still pinch hit risk. Canha does scare me here. Like I really like the $3,500 price tag against Corbin, and it's not a lock that they would pinch hit for him, but it is, a pretty natural spot to just have Lamont Wade hit later in the game when a righty comes in. So I might end up knocking my Canha projection a little bit more than I already did just because of that pinch hit risk. But he looks good from a value standpoint. It's just a matter of figuring out, dealing with the pinch hit risk and all of that. Encarnacion, I think, actually looks like a pretty good value here, given that Ramos has the hand injury and the two left-handed outfielders are already starting. So I don't think you have an outfielder to hit for him. Conforto's starting, Yastrzemski's starting, Ramos is, we assume, just not going to play. Canha's starting. So yeah, I don't think Encarnacion actually has pinch hit risk here, unless they like pinch hit for him with Wade and then moved Canha to the outfield, which I guess they could do. So there is some, but chances are only one of Kana or Encarnacion's getting pinch hit for at most. Luis Robert, I like a lot. He's not getting ownership. Good stolen base matchup. He's hit like shit for a while now, but obviously, has a track record of being a very good hitter, and there's no real reason to think that he just completely forgot how to hit. It is possible that he just does not care at this point in the White Sox season. I can't quantify, but I'm not one to typically buy into narratives, but if you tell me that Luis Robert is just going to mail it in for the next 2 months on a White Sox team that is going to win like 35 games, I would not call you crazy, but nothing I can do about that. I'm going to end up just playing him and losing money if that's the case, especially with the salary falling to 4,400. It's not like he's being priced north of 5K based on what he's done in the past. He's being priced at 4,400 because he hasn't been very good lately. Yordan Alvarez, anytime I'm getting to him at pretty low ownership, I'm going to like that. Heaney is better at limiting power to lefties, but Yordan Alvarez just crushes everybody, right or left-handed. So that looks good. Shohei, I am getting to in the outfield. So I am actually over the field on him, which I'm happy to see. And I guess I'm not having trouble getting to him plus glass now. I was getting 8% at first base. I'm getting 16 in the outfield. So I am 2x the field on Ohtani. Looks good. And then you do also get the negative correlation against Aaron Nola, which is nice. And that does make sense, since I was half the field on Nola. If I, in a lot of lineups, am hoping Nola doesn't pitch well, then I should probably be trying to work guys like Shohei Ohtani into those lineups since he is the most likely to do damage there. Mike Yastrzemski looks like a way that I'm getting different in my San Francisco stacks, getting the 14% of him at 5% owned. It's lefty-lefty against Corbin, but if you're stacking San Francisco, you're hoping that Corbin just isn't in the game long. There's no real pinch hit risk for Yastrzemski, so he should just be fine. Kyle Stowers gives you a little bit of power for cheap. Not a great matchup against Nick Martinez and kind of like a modified bullpen game, but he does have power. He's cheap. Again, if the field's just going to play guys like Garrett Hampson, I will take home run hitters like Kyle Stowers, even if he's likely to strike out several times. Conforto, again, he is getting some ownership. I'm right around the field on him. He's batting third at a good price tag. No pinch hit risk. So he looks good. JJ Bleday showing up for me. Lefty, but he is not really getting ownership. He's 3,600. I mentioned Jake Myers earlier as a value play, getting to 12% of him at like 4% ownership against Heaney. So I like that. Pretty happy, very happy with how my outfield is looking. Arcathelza said no Butler. TTID said, do we downgrade Oakland lineup after the starters came out? I haven't actually seen the lineup, so I'm refreshing that now. Daz Cameron, Andujar, Rooker, Langoliers, Nevin, Bleday, Geloff. Oh, Hernandez is back. That's cool. And Schumann. So it's not the best lineup, but Langoliers is in, so he obviously is still going to look really good. Brent Rooker, I haven't mentioned yet. I was getting like 4%, I guess, because of his price tag. Brett Rooker, obviously, anytime you can get to him, he's going to look pretty good. And Duhar looks fine. Daz Cameron's 2,900 leading off. He's going to project as a good value, but there is pinch hit risk there as well since Butler is not starting this game. There's a good chance that Butler hits for Cameron once a right-handed pitcher comes in. So that is somebody that you'll want to make sure that you are factoring in pinch hit risk for him. But he will project as a good point per dollar value just because he is so cheap. Tyler Nevin, 2,100 at first base. So no Seth Brown. Again, there is pinch hit risk for Nevin, but at 2,100, it's going to be a good point per dollar projection. So as far as guys that I would feel good about playing, Andujar, Rooker, Langoliers, Bleday, Geloff, all I think look good. Hernandez and Schumann at the bottom of the order for cheap. If you are stacking and want to mix one of those guys in, I think it's fine. Cameron and Nevin, I think, are in that category of like, they're good point per dollar good point per dollar projections. If you're stacking Oakland, especially if you're making like a bunch of Oakland stacks, you probably should have more than like none with those guys just in case they end up not getting pinch hit for. But if this game is competitive when the White Sox starter comes out, there is a pretty good chance that you're getting like Seth Brown or Lawrence Butler pinch hitting for those guys. So I would be somewhat cautious with them. But overall, the guys, for the most part, the guys I liked from Oakland are in the lineup with the exception of Seth Brown, which that could just turn into like 10% Nevin for me. I really wouldn't mind that. What percent of Nats do I have? Is 14 that too much? Without looking what I have, 14 is not too much. Like if you're getting there, it's fine. It's not like that's a crazy number. It's less than I'm getting. I have like basically no Nats. But I don't think it's crazy. The park is good for power, especially this time of year. Logan Webb's going to get ownership. I do have close to 30% Webb, so that might be driving down the Nats for me a little bit. But yeah, they're a team that I'm not really getting to, but yeah, they're perfectly fine. Like the teams that I am getting to at around, like 14%, pricing might be different, but yeah, if you tell me that I can replace Miami with Washington, I'm not going to have any problem with that. Obviously, I prefer KC and Boston. If I were playing Washington instead of like Minnesota, that would be fine with me. Same for Texas. So, Cincinnati even. I guess I like Cincinnati more than Washington, but like Miami, Minnesota, Texas, if any of those teams became Washington, I wouldn't think twice about it, wouldn't even notice it. So even though I'm not getting to them, I think they look fine. I do like the park. It's a park downgrade for Webb. Obviously, you are going up against one of the better pitchers on the slate, though, in terms of run prevention and limiting power. So that wraps up the outfield. If anybody else has any questions in the next couple of minutes, I will hit on those. Utical said worrying about lefty-lefty matchups is elementary. Yeah. Lefty-lefty and well, no. That's going to be baked into their projection. When you're talking about pinch hit risk, if you have a lefty starting against a lefty, they're probably not getting pinch hit for. If you get a righty starting against a lefty, there's a good chance that when the lefty comes out, the righty's getting pinch hit for it if you have a lefty off the bench. Worrying about lefty-lefty matchups is very basic as far as like left-handed hitters are going to hit worse against left-handed pitchers the vast majority of the time. But it's still, everything works on a spectrum still. Like, take Yordan Alvarez, for example, right? He hits left-handed pitching really, really well. So he's not the perfect example for that part of it. But like if Yordan Alvarez were facing a right-handed pitcher with the exact same everything as Andrew Heaney, his ownership would be higher, his projection would be higher. So the projection is still at least somewhat lower in the lefty-lefty matchup. The ownership comes down because the projection is lower and the matchup isn't as good. So all that stuff works together where, you prefer left-handed hitters to be facing right-handed pitchers, but like JJ Bleday is a good example here. I would much rather him be facing some right-handed pitcher coming up from Double-A, but he probably wouldn't be 4% owned if that were the case. He would be like 8 or 9%. So you get an ownership discount that makes up for the matchup not being as good. Do I like Boston against Singer? Yeah, I think they look fine. One of the higher implied run totals on the slate, good park, all of that. They are pretty expensive as a team, which I assume is why I'm not getting to a lot of their 5-mans, I don't think. I was getting to them more, I think, as mini stacks, if I remember correctly. Not really getting to them as 5-mans, but no issue. Obviously, they're a good offense. Singer this year, no power allowed to righties, but he's giving up a ton to lefties. 230 expected ISO to lefties, sub 100 to righties. So that is interesting. But again, Devers, I think, was showing up the most for me from Boston. That's obviously who I would want the most. Jaron Duran showing up a decent amount for me in the outfield. I don't think I mentioned him specifically, but he was coming in at like 8%, Fields at 13. So I think the pricing and the ownership is probably why I'm not getting to a little bit more Boston. But they do look like, from a projection standpoint, one of the better teams. Glasnow, Jonah Bride, or Webb Burger. I guess I have to say Glasnow Bride because of how much Glasnow I have. But like 2v2s in baseball, like I don't put names in a hat and pick them out. It doesn't matter. But yeah, like Glasnow Bride is probably the one that I would get to just because I have so much Glasnow and he is such a clear priority for me. Like Bride versus Burger, I prefer Burger, but they're the same in terms of range of outcomes. Glasnow Webb is not, and Glasnow is the clear priority for me. James Wood, that 4,400, perfectly fine price tag. Like pricing in baseball is so irrelevant's not the right word. It's extremely relevant, but it's relevant from like how much upside can you pack into your lineup at specific prices. It's not like basketball where, oh, he looks good at 4,400, but he would look bad at 4,900. James Wood is going to have a very high ceiling at 4,400. He's going to have a very high ceiling at 4,800. If he were like 3,600, he would really stand out as a value play, but still be pretty likely to just not do well in any given game. But yeah, I think 4,400, when you factor in everything James Wood can do as far as producing fantasy points, is like where he should be probably. The matchup against Webb isn't ideal. Webb is a good pitcher, but Park is fine. Webb doesn't get a lot of strikeouts, which works in Wood's favor. Webb also, where is he? Is not very good at preventing stolen bases. So there's that too. Will I do this for basketball as well when the NBA starts? Yeah, that's my plan. Nothing set in stone yet, but I expect I'll be doing this for basketball and also for football. Yeah, I don't anticipate offering projections for basketball like I do for baseball, like through my dub club or anything, because I don't have time for that. But as far as doing this show, yeah, I fully expect to do it for basketball. And obviously, this show for basketball will be even less useful as far as like player exposures, because we know how things change between in that last hour or whatever in basketball. But as far as like, how things are looking for me and talking about strategy and all of that, I'll still be doing it. Was Kai Bush at the flat min someone you found interesting? Yeah, I was right around the field. He's projected for 10, 11% ownership. I think I had like 12. My take on Bush was basically that he's probably not ready for the major leagues. He doesn't project to be a good strikeout pitcher yet. It is a good park. It is a good strikeout matchup. But mostly it's just that he's a fully stretched out pitcher at $4,000 on a slate that I don't really feel comfortable with any pitching. So just using him here and there is perfectly fine with me. Yeah. All right. Looks like that's all the questions. So as a reminder too, if you didn't catch it at the very beginning of the show, I'm going on vacation with the family for the rest of the week. I'm going to try and fit shows in where I can. Just pay attention to my Twitter and or the YouTube channel when I schedule them. Also, don't forget to sign up for Endgame if you haven't already. We will be having some football videos coming out, how we approach that shortly. We have a bunch of stuff out already for baseball. We have stuff that is sport agnostic, like how to build your own projections, how to build your own ownership. Nerdy just released and is in the process of releasing more videos in the series, a series of toy games for best ball. Obviously, it's that time of year. People are getting really into that. Basically, showing and demonstrating how you should be approaching different situations. So that kind of stuff is all out. We did our roundtable a couple of weeks ago where we took member questions and talked DFS for like an hour. So check all that stuff out. Use the link in the description below for Endgame Syndicate. But other than that, I will see you all back here sometime this week that I will announce later. Thanks again for checking out the show.